Hello, this is the SpreadJS v15 New Features webinar. My name is Kevin Ashley, and today I'll be going over the great new features that we have added in this release and how they can improve your application. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to type them in the chat window, and we will go over them at the end of the presentation. First off, I wanted to give you a little bit of info about myself. I am the product manager for SpreadJS and have been working on the Great City team for a little over 6 years now. I graduated from North Carolina State University with a bachelor's degree in computer science and a concentration in game design. Also joining us is Mackenzie, who is a part of our SpreadJS support team. She will help with answering any questions that you might have in the chat for this webinar. And our support team can help you with any spread issues that you might have when you submit a ticket on our website. In this presentation, I'll be going over all of the features that we have added in v15, including the beta release of Tablesheet and the Data Manager. To start off, we will go over those two features, move on to new calculation functions, enhancements to pivot tables and charts, as well as workbook and designer enhancements. Two of the most significant features that we have added to SpreadJS v15 are the table sheet and data manager. The SpreadJS table sheet is a new type of sheet component that is an extremely powerful data table. It can also take full advantage of the existing 500 plus functions in the SpreadJS calculation engine. The table sheet component is a quick data-bound table view that includes a relational data manager, which makes sorting, filtering, and other data management functions incredibly fast. The table sheet function is intended to optimize the use case of importing large data sets and performing analysis. It is essentially a fast data-bound data table view with advanced grid-like behavior and a spreadsheet user interface. Compared to a normal SpreadJS sheet, a table sheet is intended to connect to data in a simple way by binding data to a table in a database, making interacting with that data in standard SpreadJS sheets easy to do. The data binding in table sheet doesn't need to utilize an internal spreadsheet structure, so features like block grouping with group level calculations and slicers is supported. You can also use calculated columns with advanced summary and logical functions. And in terms of exporting, you can save table sheets to JSON, XLSX, and PDF files. For customizing styles, you can utilize data-bound conditional formatting, data validation, and column styles, as well as alternating row styles and states. You can even pin rows and columns to the top and sides of a table sheet to make sure that they are always visible. And you can also add specialized rows or columns for CRUD operations. All of these different customizations can make interacting with the data much easier for your users, in addition to taking those changes and updating a data source easier for the developer. The other addition with Tablesheet is the Data Manager, which is essentially a powerful new data engine API that makes connecting and interacting with bound data really easy. It supports data binding and data relationships, as well as interaction with the server-side part of applications by sending requests to fetch data. The biggest part of Data Manager is that it can be bound to a table sheet. The Data Manager will take data from a data source and create a table for it, along with data relations to other tables. A view from that table can be defined with specific data fields and then bound to a table sheet. Using both these in conjunction provides additional functionality, which includes support for custom cell data types like projected data-bound cells or formula references. You can also use Tablesheet and the Data Manager to automatically update the data source with every change or in batches using the auto-sync or batch update modes. Table sheets can also be added to SpreadJS instances as just another sheet in the workbook. As such, this makes it so that SpreadJS worksheets can cross-reference formulas within table sheets in the workbook. It should be noted that these features are still considered to be in beta, as there are more features that we plan on adding. And I will now show you some demos for Tablesheet. So you can see right here, we have a simple table sheet with a bunch of data in it. And in the code behind, we actually have defined a data manager here. And then we've defined a table within that data manager. And here we just specified the data, which we got from a URL. And then we specified some columns as to what sort of data types they would be. And then down here, we have created a sheet and added it to the spread workbook in the form of a table sheet type. And then once we have that sheet, we fetch a view from the table that we defined in the data manager. And we specified all the fields that we want in that view. And then once we have that, we simply set that view to that new table sheet that we created. We also have calculated columns. So for example, here, the total units and stock value are actually fields that are not present in the table, but use the table fields for calculation. So you can see in the code behind here, we have our view just like before, but here we have used other fields to define a total units and stock value field. You can also pin rows and columns. So here's an example of that. We pin these rows to the top, so you always see them no matter how far down you scroll. We also have the auto sync and batch updates. So here's kind of an example of the CRUD operation. So if I wanted to remove a row, I could do that. And then I could save those changes to the table sheet and then subsequently the data manager. But it's up to you to connect that data manager to your data source. Now we move on to the calculation engine enhancements. The biggest function that we have added was Lambda. This Excel function essentially lets you create and name custom reusable functions in standard Excel formula language. These are similar to the built-in SpreadJS custom functions, except you can actually import and export them from and to Excel. We've also implemented other functions that utilize Lambda, including map, reduce, scan, make array, by row, by column, and is omitted. I will now show you an example of these functions. So right here, we have a few examples of the Lambda function. This one, for example, takes a Fahrenheit temperature and converts it to Celsius. So here we have defined the Lambda function with that formula and called it to Celsius. So now that I have that function defined, I can simply use it as I would a normal function, and it will give me the result that I defined. We have some other examples too. This one computes a factorial. This one replaces characters in a string. So it's really limitless in terms of the things that you can do with Lambda functions. And I encourage you to take a look at that and see what else you can do with it. We have also added a few other functions relating to converting characters. The ASC function converts full width characters to half width, and the DBCS function does the opposite. Now, it should be noted that these additions are mainly for international customers. So you can see in the examples I have here on the slides, the top section there is the ASC function, which will take those full width characters and convert them to half width. And then on the bottom, the DBCS function. And now we will move on to pivot tables, which we introduced in our 14.1 release. But with this release, we have added even more features to it. The first of which is the pivot table slicer. which lets users filter with a single click. Using a familiar interface, you can filter an aggregate target by connecting multiple pivot tables, as well as manage the filter state of row and column fields. The get pivot data function also now supports spill results as long as the allow dynamic array property is set to true. And now I'll show you an example of that slicer. So here we have a pivot table on the left, and then we have some slicers on the right. So slicers will work much like you probably expect. You can select options to filter in the slicer, and it'll filter the pivot table accordingly. One of the other enhancements we have added to pivot tables is calculated items. These can be added into a row or column field array, and they use constants or references to other fields in the pivot table. They use formulas to calculate new values that don't exist in the original data, such as calculating the total number of outstanding orders in an office supply pivot table. Data type filters were already supported, but with this release, we have added date-to-date filters, including quarter-to-date, month-to-date, and year-to-date. And I will now show you a demo of both of these features. So here we have calculated items. They're very similar to the table sheet calculated items. So you simply defined a new field that uses other fields, that references other fields rather. So let's see, it is right here. So as you can see, we've added a calculated item called outstanding orders. And this is defined as the number of orders that are canceled, on back order, and pending. So you can see right here, this specific row is our calculated item. And then we have the date-to-date filters. So right here, we have another pivot table. Let's say I wanted to filter just by a specific date range. So I go to date filters. And in this case, let's say I just want to get the dates between January 1st, 2017 and January 15th, 2017. So once I set that, it'll filter out until I have the corresponding data with those date values shown in the pivot table. The visibility of pivot table headers can now be controlled for names of fields in both row and column directions using the show headers property. And as you can see, we have this GIF here that shows disabling and showing those headers. And we have also added support for ignoring the style when importing or exporting a pivot table by saving only the visible data. So this means that the pivot table and its cache will be dropped when importing or exporting as you see fit. To make fields in pivot tables easier to format, we have added a custom dialog for when a user right-clicks on the value fields and selects the new context menu item. This means you can easily format values as currency, for example, with a simple and intuitive menu. As a simple enhancement that we made to the filter dialog was to add a search box. So if you have a lot of fields that you want to filter on, you can just search for them easily. And you can see examples of both of these enhancements in the screenshots there in the slides. We made one enhancement to our charts in the form of data point style customization. So in previous releases, data points in a chart had a predefined set of colors that were automatically chosen when the chart was created. But with v15, we have these colors and styles so they can be customized individually using the data point style interface. And that pie chart shows some of those customized colors and styles. So they're not just, solid colors. In v15, we made a lot of enhancements to standard workbook functionality in SpreadJS, the first of which is context menu scrolling. This feature was made to work in instances where the SpreadJS workbook was not big enough to show the entire context menu. So scroll bars will now show up when the entire context menu won't fit within the display. And you can also set these manually. Centering cells has also been enhanced so that users can now select entire cell ranges and center the text across them. This is different from the standard merge and center, as the cells aren't actually merged, they just appear so. But this means that things like filtering or drag filling won't be affected by merged cells in a workbook. And I'll now show you a quick example of these two features. So we got context menu scrolling. So here we have the standard context menu, but I can set the height of that menu. So let's say 100 and make sure the enable context menu scrolling is set. So now when I do that, a scroll bars will appear on the context menu. So you can see how useful this might be if, say, your actual SpreadJS instance was maybe smaller than this, but you still wanted to show all the context menu. Well, now you can with these scroll bars. And then we also have the text alignment. So here's the center across selection. So right now, you can see, for example, these cells are merged. And although this one appears merged, it's actually just centered across the selection. So if I were to do that, you could see it's actually just in that one cell. If I center continuous, then it centers across that entire selection of cells. The invalid operation event has also been enhanced to work with drag fill. So it will now fire when there's any invalid operation involving drag filling cells. Formatting cells now includes support for using color indexes ranging from 1 to 56. And I'll show you really quickly how that color index formatting works. So here we have the documentation, and it's just simply a formatter. And I can set a specific color index for a specific range of values. So in this case, it'll be that color when values are below 300, this color when values are above 400, etc. So you can set it that way in code. Our name style implementation has been enhanced to include apply flags that affect the different properties. These include number format, font, fill, border, alignment, and protection. These flags can be used when creating a name style so that only certain properties of the style are affected. And with our printing enhancement, we have also included options to specify the locations of headers and footers on all pages, the first page, or odd and even pages. So I'll quickly show you what I mean by that. So here we have custom printing. We have all the print options here, which are actually defined in code down here, but we just have a simple UI for it in the specific demo. So I can select the type of footer or when I want the header and footer to get applied, and I can set that in print info. And I'll show you that in the designer when we get to the designer section. But it should be noted that you can do this just in code. You can just set the print info yourself. The built-in filtering in SpreadJS v15 has been enhanced with support for outlining dates. This means that if the filter is being done on data that consists of dates, those dates can be outlined by year, month, and day to make filtering a bit easier and intuitive. And you can see an example right there where all these dates are formatted such that they're in almost like a tree list sort of, or an outline. A major Excel compatibility feature that we added was the ability for users to start entering formulas with the plus or minus key, as opposed to just the equal sign. So I can quickly show you how that works. So say we have some values, put 2 and 3. And normally, if I wanted to sum these values, I would have to say equals sum. But in this case, I can also just put a plus sign, sum, and then that one, that one. So this is something that people that use Excel are used to. And so we've added that to SpreadJS as well. Row and column states have been added to SpreadJS, which allow the developer to select different states to apply conditional formatting on entire rows or columns. These states include edit, hover, active, selected, updated, inserted, dirty, and invalid. You can use these states to apply a specific conditional formatting rule using add row state rule or add column state rule, which will apply special formatting on entire rows or columns when certain states are satisfied. And I'll now show you a simple sample of these states. So here we have a workbook that has sheets for each one of these states. And as you can see, we have defined, for example, a row state for when the mouse is hovered over specific rows in this table. And this one is for a column state. And then this one is for both the row and column states. We also have the active one. So if a cell is active, then it'll apply those states. If it's in edit mode, if you insert a cell, it's selected, and then invalid, so on and so forth. We have also added some customer requested features to make the designer component even easier to use for your users. One of the biggest additions we made was printing, which includes the page setup dialog, with which you can customize familiar printing options, such as page orientation, headers, footers, and scaling. Another feature is text to columns, which lets you convert delimiter separated text in a single column to separate columns with a dialog to help customize the different options. And I'll now show you both of these features in the designer. So here we have the designer. And if you go to print, you see we have settings here. We also have the page setup dialog. It's your standard page setup dialog. So we got all these different options that you can set. It should be pretty familiar. And then the text to columns, I believe is right. Let's see. Let me find it. There it is. So say I had some text, let's just say A, B, C, D, E, B, C, D. So I can select these and go text to columns. And so you can see I have a little wizard here that helps me separate this text out. So in this case, the delimiter is a tab or a comma rather. And then I can have it actually separate those into columns. Another Excel compatibility feature is remove duplicates, which lets you quickly and automatically remove redundant data with an included dialog window. Doing so only keeps the first occurrence of each value in the cell range. And you can see there in the GIF, we have a bunch of data with some duplicate values in it. And we simply select the column and then remove the duplicate values. In a previous release of SpreadJS, we added the ability to change the position of the sheet tabs around the SpreadJS instance. We have now added that. We have now added that to the SpreadJS designer. This menu lets users choose to move the sheet tabs to the top, left, right, or bottom of the SpreadJS instance. And it should be noted that you can enable or disable this functionality in your application. As you can see in that GIF, we have a little context menu for changing the sheet tab position. With v15, we made the name manager dialog easy to use by adding a filter to it. This lets you filter names that are scoped to the workbook, scoped to the worksheet, with or without errors, define names, and table names. This can be really useful when the workbook has a lot of names in it and you need to change a specific one. The last enhancement we made to the designer is to support opening the find and replace dialog with Control F, which is an existing Excel keyboard shortcut. Now, with all these features mentioned in this webinar, we have included them in the designer as new buttons, side panels, and dialogues. We also offer optional add-ons for SpreadJS, which include the designer component and the pivot table. The SpreadJS designer component add-on gives you the ability to offer an extensive and familiar Excel-like ribbon bar and UI within your own applications, making it easy and intuitive for your customers to interact with SpreadJS. Based on the SpreadJS desktop designer, this fully customizable interface can be added to and changed to fit the needs of your customers. And with wrappers for Angular, React, and Vue, you can embed the designer in those types of projects with ease. The pivot table add-on for SpreadJS provides your users with a powerful data analysis and reporting tool. You can use pivot tables to quickly and effectively analyze complex data sets with a familiar UI. Fully customize your application's needs with built-in aggregations, pivot table field lists, and calculated fields for analysis. With this add-on, you can customize how pivot tables are presented in your application, including report layouts, panels, themes, fields, and views. These add-ons are separate from the base SpreadJS and need to be purchased in order to include this functionality in your application to provide to your users. And that concludes the SpreadJS v15 New Features webinar. If there are any questions, please post them in the chat now and we'll go over them. Otherwise, feel free to submit feedback on this webinar using my email provided. If you have any sort of feature or component requests, please submit those using our support portal. And if you haven't already, you can download a trial of SpreadJS at www.grapecity.com/SpreadJS.